Tonight, we begin a gentle journey through the eyes of a very special cat. This is not a story of adventure or excitement. Instead, it's a peaceful drift through the quiet thoughts of a housecat who tells us his own story in his own words. Let your mind settle as we listen to his gentle voice and the simple wisdom that comes from seeing life through whiskers and soft paws. But before that, my name's Murphy, and I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time of day it is for you. If this brings you calm, don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more peaceful nights ahead. Let us begin. My name doesn't really matter, though my humans call me something that sounds pleasant enough when they remember to use it. I'm what you might call an ordinary house cat, with soft grey fur and white paws that look like I've stepped in fresh snow. My eyes are green, and I've been told they're quite expressive, though I'm not entirely sure what humans mean by that. I live in a house that feels just right. Not too big, not too small, but filled with all the things that make a place feel like home. There are sunny spots that appear and disappear throughout the day, following a pattern I've studied and memorized over many seasons. The morning sun finds the kitchen windowsill first, warming the smooth surface until it's perfect for my first nap of the day. By afternoon, the light has moved to the living room carpet, creating a golden patch that's exactly the right size for stretching out completely. This house has been my world for as long as I can remember clearly. I know every corner, every hiding spot, every surface that's just right for perching. I've claimed the velvet armchair by the front window as my official observation post, where I can watch the outside world while remaining perfectly comfortable. The throw blanket that lives on this chair has been shaped by my daily nesting until it holds the perfect impression of my body. There was a time, not so very long ago, when I was the center of attention in this house. My humans would spend their evenings sitting together, and I was their entertainment. Not in a demanding way, but in the gentle way that cats have always entertained the humans they choose to live with. I would perform my daily stretches, each one a small masterpiece of feline grace, and they would stop their conversations to watch me with genuine appreciation. I remember how they would laugh softly when I would test each sunny spot in the house, circling 3 times before settling down. It wasn't superstition or habit. It was simply the proper way to ensure maximum comfort. They seem to understand this, the way good humans understand that cats have reasons for everything we do, even if those reasons aren't immediately obvious. My napping positions were particularly appreciated during those peaceful days. I had developed quite a repertoire of sleeping poses, each one more unlikely than the last. Sometimes I would drape myself across the back of the couch, letting my paws hang down on either side like a living, breathing piece of furniture that happened to purr. Other times, I would curl up in a perfect circle, tucking my tail around my body and hiding my paws underneath me until I looked like a grey and white cushion that someone had left in just the right spot. When my humans would discover me in one of these poses, they would call to each other with gentle excitement. Their voices would take on that special tone that humans use when they've found something that makes them happy in a quiet, everyday sort of way. They would even bring out their small rectangular devices, the ones that make clicking sounds, and point them in my direction. I never quite understood the purpose of this ritual, but their obvious pleasure in it made me feel important and admired. I had perfected the art of being adorably clumsy during those golden days. Sometimes I would misjudge the distance between the coffee table and the couch, landing with just enough awkwardness to be endearing rather than embarrassing. Or I would knock a pen off a desk with that careful, deliberate motion that cats use when we want to test whether gravity is still working properly. My humans would react to these moments with a mixture of gentle scolding and barely hidden amusement that made me feel both mischievous and deeply loved. Every morning, I would perform my inspection of the food bowl. This wasn't because I was particularly hungry, but because proper quality control requires daily attention. I would sniff carefully, testing the freshness of both the water and the kibble, making sure everything met my standards. My humans would watch this ritual with patient smiles, understanding that some things simply cannot be rushed. Afternoons brought the serious business of selecting the perfect nap location. This required testing at least 4 different spots, taking into account factors like temperature, softness, and the likelihood of being disturbed by household activities. I would spend several minutes at each potential location, lying down, adjusting my position, then getting up to try the next spot. My humans seemed to find this process endlessly fascinating, often commenting to each other about my thoroughness. Evenings were perhaps the most cherished time of all. My humans would settle into their favorite spots in the living room, and I would make my royal entrance. Sometimes I would choose to honor the couch with my presence, stretching out along its length like a furry ruler surveying his domain. Other times, I would select the area rug in the center of the room, where I could be admired from all angles. During these peaceful hours, I would groom myself with the dedication of an artist perfecting his craft. Each lick was deliberate and thorough, and my humans would often pause their conversations to watch me work. They seemed to find something soothing about the rhythm of my grooming, the way I would carefully clean each pore and then use it to wash behind my ears. I had a special talent for appearing in doorways at exactly the right moment, sitting perfectly still with my tail wrapped around my front paws. This pose, which I called my statue impression, never failed to get their attention. They would notice me there and smile, sometimes calling my name in that affectionate way that made my chest rumble with contentment. Those were the days when every yawn was noticed, every stretch was appreciated, and every small act of cattishness was met with gentle laughter and warm attention. I felt like the most important creature in the house, which was exactly as it should be from a cat's perspective. My humans understood that watching a cat live his daily life was one of life's simple pleasures, and they gave me their full attention during these quiet performances. The house felt different then, filled with a calm energy that centered around the simple act of being together. My humans would sit and read, or talk quietly, or sometimes just enjoy the comfortable silence. And I would be there among them, a warm, purring reminder that some of the best things in life require nothing more than presence and appreciation. I remember the way the light would change throughout those evenings, growing softer and more golden as the day wound down. The house would settle into that peaceful quiet that comes when everyone is exactly where they want to be. I would often end these evenings curled up near my humans, close enough to feel their warmth, but not so close as to be intrusive, listening to the gentle sounds of their breathing and feeling perfectly content with my place in their world. But as I've learned, even the most comfortable routines can change in ways we don't expect. The change began gradually, so slowly that I didn't notice it at first. My humans started spending more time looking at things that weren't me. These things were flat and rectangular, like the windows in our house, but they glowed with their own light, even when the sun wasn't shining through them. I began to call these mysterious objects the glowing windows, because that's exactly what they looked like to me. They were about the size of a book, but instead of having pages filled with black marks on white paper, they showed moving pictures that seemed to dance and change constantly. The light from these windows would reflect in my human's eyes, creating tiny bright spots that made them look like they were seeing something far away. At first, I thought these glowing windows might be some new form of entertainment that my humans wanted to share with me. Perhaps they were showing pictures of other cats, or birds for me to watch, or something equally interesting. I would approach when I saw them holding these devices, hoping to see what was capturing their attention so completely. But when I came close enough to investigate, the pictures on the glowing windows didn't seem to be meant for cats at all. Instead of birds or mice or other fascinating creatures, I saw tiny humans doing various things. Some were talking, their mouths moving silently since I couldn't hear what they were saying over my human's focus. Others were showing objects or performing actions that didn't make much sense to me. What puzzled me most was how completely these glowing windows seemed to capture my human's attention. They would stare at them with an intensity that I recognized, because it was similar to the way I watch a particularly interesting bird outside the real window. Their eyes would follow the movements on the screen, and their faces would change expression in response to whatever they were seeing. I tried to understand what was so fascinating about these glowing windows. During my morning inspections of the house, I would pause to examine them more carefully. When they weren't being held by my humans, these devices would sit quietly on tables or counters, their screens dark and unreflective. They looked harmless enough, just smooth black rectangles that gave no hint of the mesmerizing power they seemed to hold. Sometimes I would sit next to my humans while they looked at their glowing windows, hoping to share in whatever they were experiencing. I would position myself close enough to see the screen, watching the tiny figures move around in their bright, colorful world. But no matter how carefully I observed, I couldn't understand what made these moving pictures more interesting than the real world around us. The people inside the glowing windows seemed to live in a place that was always bright and busy. They moved quickly and talked constantly, even though I couldn't hear their voices. Sometimes my humans would make small sounds in response to whatever was happening on the screen. They would laugh quietly, or make little gasps of surprise, or nod their heads as if agreeing with something the tiny people had said. What bothered me most was that these interactions felt one-sided. The people in the glowing windows never seemed to notice my humans watching them. They never looked back or responded directly to my humans' reactions. It was like watching fish in a tank, except that fish are actually there in front of you, while these tiny people seemed to exist in some other place entirely. I began to wonder if the glowing windows might be portals to another world, one where everything happened much faster and more dramatically than in our quiet house. Maybe my humans were exploring this other place, traveling there with their minds, while their bodies remained sitting comfortably in their chairs. This would explain why they seemed so absorbed in what they were seeing, and why they sometimes forgot about everything else around them. As the days passed, I noticed that my humans were spending more and more time looking at their glowing windows. What had started as occasional glances became longer periods of focused attention. They would hold these devices during breakfast, checking them while their coffee grew cold. They would carry them from room to room, never quite setting them down for very long. The glowing windows seemed to follow my humans everywhere, even during times that had previously been reserved for other activities. The devices would appear. During meals, one or both of my humans would place their glowing window next to their plate, glancing at it between bites. During conversations, they would occasionally look down at their screens, as if the tiny people inside had something urgent to share. I tried to compete for attention with these mysterious objects, but it was challenging. When I would perform one of my most charming stretches, my humans might look up briefly and smile, but then their eyes would return to the glowing window almost immediately. When I would execute a perfect leap from the floor to the kitchen counter, a move that had previously earned enthusiastic applause, they would barely glance in my direction. The most confusing part was that my humans seemed to be having relationships with the people inside the glowing windows. They would react emotionally to whatever was happening on the screen, sometimes becoming excited or concerned or amused. They would even talk to the glowing windows occasionally, making comments or asking questions that the tiny people inside couldn't possibly hear. I began to feel like I was watching my humans communicate with friends who lived in another dimension, friends who were always available but never truly present. These relationships seemed to satisfy something in my humans that I couldn't provide, no matter how perfectly I performed my daily routines or how charmingly I positioned myself in sunny spots around the house. The light from the glowing windows was different from natural light, and I found it somewhat unsettling. It was blue and artificial, creating harsh shadows and making everything around it look slightly unreal. When my humans sat in dark rooms with only their glowing windows for illumination, their faces would take on an eerie, otherworldly appearance that made me feel distant from them even when I was sitting right beside them. As I watched my humans interact with their glowing windows day after day, I began to understand that something fundamental had changed in our household. These devices weren't just tools or toys. They were windows into a world that seemed to offer my humans something they couldn't find in our quiet, comfortable home. Something that apparently couldn't be provided by afternoon naps, perfect stretches, or the warm weight of a purring cat on their lap. The realization made me feel small and somewhat forgotten, like a favorite book that had been set aside in favor of something newer and more exciting. I was still there, still ready to provide companionship and entertainment, but my humans' attention had been captured by the endless stream of activity flowing through their glowing windows. And so I began to understand that I was no longer the most interesting thing in my humans' lives. The glowing windows had introduced them to a world full of other people, other stories, other sources of amusement and distraction. I was just one cat in one house, while the glowing windows contained multitudes. As my humans spent more time with their glowing windows, I began to feel something I had never experienced before in this house. It was a hollow feeling, like the sensation of being hungry but not for food. I was lonely, but not alone. My humans were still there, still sharing the same space with me, but somehow they felt farther away than ever. I would position myself in my usual spots around the house, the places where I had always been noticed and admired. The sunny patch near the front window, the soft cushion on the dining room chair, the warm air near the heating vent, where the air always smelled faintly of something comforting. But now, instead of drawing gentle attention and fond smiles, these positions felt like stages where I was performing for an audience that was looking somewhere else. The mornings were particularly difficult. I still performed my daily ritual of inspecting the food bowl, testing the freshness of the water, and conducting a thorough quality review of my breakfast. But my humans, who used to watch this ceremony with patient amusement, now held their glowing windows while they prepared their own morning meal. Their eyes stayed fixed on the bright screens, even as they moved around the kitchen, occasionally glancing up to avoid bumping into furniture, but never quite seeing me. I tried to adapt by positioning myself in locations where I couldn't possibly be ignored. I would sit directly in front of the coffee maker, knowing that my humans would need to interact with this device as part of their morning routine, but they would simply step around me, sometimes patting my head absently without really looking at me, their attention still captured by whatever was happening in their glowing windows. During my afternoon nap times, which had previously been opportunities for my humans to appreciate the artistry of my sleeping positions, I found myself truly alone. My humans would be in the same room, sitting on the couch or in their favorite chairs, but they were somewhere else entirely. Their bodies were present, but their minds had traveled into the glowing windows, leaving me with only the shells of the people I had grown to love. I began to test different approaches to recapturing their attention. I tried making myself smaller and more pathetic, curling up in tight little balls that emphasized how much I needed their warmth and comfort. I tried making myself larger and more impressive, stretching out to my full length in positions that demonstrated my feline magnificence. But no matter how I arranged myself, the glowing windows seemed to be more compelling than anything I could offer. The evenings, which had once been our special time together, became the loneliest part of the day. My humans would settle into their usual spots in the living room, and I would hopefully take my position nearby, ready to provide companionship and entertainment. But instead of the gentle conversations and shared, comfortable silences that had once filled these hours, there was now only the soft clicking of fingers on glass and the occasional mumbled comment directed at the glowing windows. I would watch my humans react to whatever they were seeing on their screens. They would smile at jokes I couldn't hear, become concerned about problems I couldn't see, and engage in conversations with people who weren't actually in our house. Their emotional energy, which had previously been available to me, was now being directed towards these mysterious relationships that existed only within the glowing windows. Sometimes I would position myself between my humans and their glowing windows, hoping to break the spell that seemed to hold them captive. I would sit directly in their line of sight, using my most appealing poses and expressions. Occasionally, this would work for a moment. They would notice me and smile, sometimes even reaching out to pet me gently. But then their attention would drift back to the screen, and I would be forgotten again. The hardest part was that my humans didn't seem to realize anything had changed. They still fed me regularly and made sure I had fresh water and a clean litter box. They still lived in the same house with me, breathing the same air and sharing the same spaces. But the quality of their attention had shifted completely. They were physically present, but emotionally absent, like actors who had forgotten their lines and were reading from scripts that only they could see. I began to feel invisible, as if I had become a ghost cat haunting a house where I had once been the center of attention. I could move through the rooms, occupy my favorite spots, and perform my most charming behaviors. But none of it seemed to register with my humans in the same way it had before. They acknowledged me when necessary, but they no longer truly saw me. During the quiet hours of the night, when my humans finally put away their glowing windows and settled into sleep, I would lie awake, thinking about what had changed. I was still the same cat I had always been. My fur was just as soft, my purr just as soothing, my personality just as engaging. But somehow, I had become less interesting than the tiny people who lived inside the rectangular screens. I started to wonder if there was something wrong with me. Maybe I had lost my appeal without realizing it. Maybe my stretches weren't as elegant as they used to be, or my sleeping positions weren't as endearing. Maybe I had grown boring or predictable, and my humans had simply outgrown their need for the simple pleasures of cat companionship. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I could still feel the love my humans had for me, even when their attention was elsewhere. When they did look at me directly, their eyes still held warmth and affection. When they petted me, their touch was still gentle and caring. The love was still there, but it had to compete with something that seemed to offer endless novelty and excitement. The glowing windows never slept, never needed food or water, never made demands or required care. They were always ready to provide entertainment or information or companionship, without asking for anything in return. They were perfect companions in their own way, except for the fact that they weren't real, and they weren't present in the physical world that I occupied. I began to understand that I was experiencing something that many cats throughout history had probably never had to face. I was competing with an entire universe of alternative entertainment that existed inside small rectangular screens. My simple, genuine, physical presence couldn't compete with the infinite variety and constant stimulation that the glowing windows provided. And so I learned what it felt like to be lonely in a house full of love. My humans still cared for me, but their attention had been captured by something that offered them connection to a larger world beyond our quiet home. I was still fed and sheltered and loved, but I was no longer the most interesting thing in my humans' daily lives. This realization made me feel very small and very old, even though I was neither. I was just a house cat who had grown used to being important, and now I was learning how to be ordinary. It wasn't a comfortable lesson, but it was one that seemed necessary in this new world, where glowing windows could transport humans to places and experiences that a purring cat simply couldn't provide. After several days of feeling invisible and forgotten, I decided that I couldn't simply accept this new reality without putting up some kind of fight. If my humans were going to spend all their time staring at glowing windows instead of appreciating my company, then I would have to remind them of what they were missing. I would reclaim their attention through a carefully planned campaign of increasingly dramatic demonstrations. My first strategy was to intensify my most successful behaviors from the past. If gentle stretching and peaceful napping weren't enough to compete with the glowing windows, then I would perform these activities with more flair and in more prominent locations. I began executing my stretches directly in front of the television screen, extending each leg with extra deliberation, and adding a few additional poses that I had been saving for special occasions. When this didn't produce the desired results, I moved my operations to more strategic locations. I discovered that positioning myself directly on top of whatever glowing window my humans were trying to use was remarkably effective at getting their attention. I would wait until they were deeply absorbed in whatever was happening on the screen, then casually walk across their lap and settle myself right on top of the device. This approach certainly got me noticed, but not always in the way I had hoped. My humans would gently move me aside, sometimes with a patient laugh, but they would immediately return their attention to the glowing window as soon as I was no longer blocking their view. It was clear that I was being treated as a temporary interruption rather than a preferred alternative entertainment option. Frustrated by the lack of response to my subtle approaches, I decided to try more direct methods of communication. I began meowing at my humans with greater frequency and volume, hoping to break through whatever spell the glowing windows seemed to cast over them. I developed a repertoire of different vocalizations, each designed to convey a specific message. There was my hungry meow, even when I wasn't particularly hungry, because this sound had always been effective at getting immediate attention. There was my concerned meow, which I used when approaching my humans with an expression of urgent worry about some imaginary problem. There was my conversational meow, delivered while making direct eye contact, as if I were trying to start a meaningful discussion about important cat matters. I even tried my pathetic meow, a particularly pitiful sound that I had previously reserved for genuine emergencies, or when I wanted something special. This meow was designed to suggest that I was suffering from some terrible injustice and needed immediate comfort and attention. In the past, this sound had been almost irresistible to my humans, causing them to drop whatever they were doing and focus entirely on my needs. During one particularly frustrating afternoon, as I watched my humans completely ignore my latest performance of strategic object knocking, I began to wonder if I was approaching this problem from the wrong angle. Maybe the issue wasn't that I needed to be more dramatic or demanding. Maybe I needed to understand what the glowing windows were offering that I couldn't provide. I started paying closer attention to what my humans were actually doing with their devices. I noticed that they seemed to be looking at pictures of other people's lives, other people's food, other people's pets. They would scroll through endless streams of images, occasionally stopping to make approving sounds or to show something to each other. This gave me an idea that seemed both brilliant and slightly ridiculous. If my humans were so interested in looking at pictures of cats on their glowing windows, perhaps what I needed was to start my own show. I could create my own series of performances specifically designed for the glowing window format. I could call it something catchy and appealing, maybe only paws, and showcase all my most impressive behaviors in a way that would be impossible to ignore. I spent several days planning this venture. I would start with my greatest hits, the perfect circle nap position, the gravity-defying stretch that made me look like I was trying to become twice as long as physics should allow, and the adorable face-washing routine that had always been a crowd favorite. I would perform these activities in the most photogenic locations in the house, with perfect lighting and interesting backgrounds. But then I realized a fundamental problem with this plan. I had no way to actually operate the glowing windows myself. My paws weren't the right shape for the precise movements that seemed to be required, and I couldn't understand the symbols and images that appeared on the screens. I would need my humans to help me create my only paws content, but they were too busy watching other people's content to pay attention to mine. This realization was both frustrating and somewhat humorous. I was a cat trying to compete with the internet by joining the internet, but I lacked the basic technical skills necessary to make this plan work. I was like someone trying to win a game without understanding the rules or having access to the equipment. As I contemplated this dilemma, I began to develop a grudging respect for the glowing windows and whatever lived inside them. These devices had managed to capture and hold my human's attention in a way that was both complete and seemingly effortless. They offered an endless stream of novelty and entertainment without requiring any of the care and attention that a real, physical cat needed. The glowing windows had won, at least for now. But I was still learning, still observing, still trying to understand what had changed in my world and how I might adapt to these new circumstances. Perhaps the solution wasn't to compete with the glowing windows, but to find a way to coexist with them, or even to find my own place in this new reality, where attention was a precious resource that had to be shared with forces beyond my control. As my efforts to compete with the glowing windows continued to meet with limited success, I found myself retreating more and more into my own imagination. During the long afternoon hours, when my humans were most absorbed in their devices, I would curl up in my favorite sunny spot and let my mind wander into fantasies about what the world might be like if cats were in charge of everything, especially those mysterious, glowing windows that had captured so much attention. I began to imagine a parallel universe where the roles were completely reversed. In this world, humans existed primarily to serve cats, and the most popular form of entertainment was watching humans go about their daily activities. Cats would sit in comfortable chairs, holding their own glowing windows, scrolling through endless feeds of human content, while occasionally pausing to make approving, purring sounds at particularly amusing posts. In my imaginary cat-controlled internet, the most popular videos would be humans attempting to open cans of food with their clumsy, non-retractable claws. Cats would watch these clips with the same fascination that my humans seem to show when watching people dance or sing or do other inexplicable things on their screens. There would be compilation videos of humans trying to land gracefully after jumping down from furniture, usually failing in adorably awkward ways that would make cats purr with gentle amusement. The social media platforms in this alternate universe would be designed entirely around feline interests and aesthetics. Instead of whatever it was that humans found so compelling about their current glowing windows, cats would share pictures of the most perfectly arranged sunny spots, rating them based on warmth, duration of sunlight, and comfort level. There would be entire networks dedicated to reviewing cardboard boxes with detailed discussions about size, structural integrity, and nappability. Food content would be absolutely central to the cat internet, but it would focus on the really important aspects of dining that humans seemed to overlook. Instead of just showing pictures of finished meals, cat social media would feature comprehensive documentation of the entire food experience. There would be detailed reviews of different kibble textures, slow-motion videos of the perfect milk pour, and artistic photography showcasing the aesthetic beauty of an ideally arranged food bowl. In my fantasy, cats would have developed their own version of influencer culture, where the most successful content creators would be cats who had mastered particularly impressive napping techniques or had achieved legendary status for their stretching abilities. These cat celebrities would have millions of followers who would tune in daily to watch them demonstrate proper grooming methods or review new types of cat furniture. The cat internet would also feature educational content, but focused on subjects that actually mattered. There would be instructional videos on advanced bird watching techniques, comprehensive guides to identifying the best hiding spots in any given house, and masterclasses on the subtle art of training humans to provide food and attention on demand. Dating apps in the cat internet would be refreshingly straightforward, focusing on compatibility factors that actually mattered. Cats would swipe based on preferred nap schedules, mutual interests in specific types of prey, and compatibility of territorial requirements. The most successful profiles would feature multiple photos of the cat in various sleeping positions, demonstrating their range and versatility as a napping partner. News coverage in the cat internet would focus on the stories that were actually important to feline society. Headlines would include updates on seasonal sunbeam patterns, alerts about changes in household routines that might affect nap schedules, and investigative reports on humans who had been observed paying insufficient attention to their cats. Weather forecasts would include crucial information like optimal times for window sitting and predictions for the movement of sunny spots throughout the day. Shopping platforms would be revolutionized to serve actual cat needs. Instead of the confusing array of products that humans seemed to find appealing, the cat internet would feature carefully curated selections of the finest cardboard boxes, premium sunny windowsills available for rent, and artisanal varieties of dust particles for chasing. Product reviews would be written by cats who had actually tested these items through proper napping, scratching, and investigating. Entertainment content would include serialized stories about cats who had achieved great things, like successfully training their humans to open doors on command, or mastering the art of appearing pathetic enough to earn extra treats. There would be reality shows following the daily lives of cats in different types of households, with dramatic storylines revolving around disputes over favorite sleeping spots and the complex politics of multi-cat families. The most popular form of entertainment would be live streams of humans trying to work, while cats attempted to help. These streams would feature multiple camera angles showing humans typing on keyboards while cats walked across them, or humans trying to read books while cats positioned themselves directly on top of the pages. The comment sections would be filled with cats offering advice on more effective attention-seeking techniques and sharing their own stories of successful human interruption. As I developed these fantasies in greater and greater detail, they became a source of comfort during the loneliest parts of my day. When my humans were most absorbed in their glowing windows, I could retreat into this imaginary world where cats were the ones in control, where feline priorities were the most important considerations, and where humans existed primarily to serve and entertain their cat companions. But even in my most elaborate daydreams, I couldn't entirely escape the reality of my situation. These fantasies were amusing and comforting, but they didn't change the fact that my human's attention had been captured by something that I couldn't understand or compete with. The cat internet existed only in my imagination, while the human internet was very real and very compelling to the people I lived with. During one particularly lonely afternoon, as my humans sat absorbed in their glowing windows, and I felt more invisible than usual, I decided to seek out the other animals in our neighborhood to see if they were experiencing similar challenges. I had always been somewhat solitary by nature, preferring to observe other creatures from a distance rather than engaging in lengthy conversations. But now, faced with this strange new world, where glowing windows seemed more important than real animals, I felt the need to connect with others who might understand my situation. My first conversation was with Buster, the golden retriever who lived next door. Buster was the kind of dog who approached every day with enthusiastic optimism. always convinced that something wonderful was about to happen. I found him in his backyard, lying in the shade with his tongue hanging out, looking unusually contemplative for such a naturally cheerful creature. When I approached the fence that separated our yards, Buster lifted his head and greeted me with a tired version of his usual enthusiasm. His tail wagged, but slowly, as if even this simple gesture required more energy than he could easily spare. I asked him how things were going with his humans lately, and his response surprised me with its melancholy. Buster told me that his humans had also become fascinated with glowing windows, though his were larger than the ones my humans preferred. His family would sit together in their living room, but instead of talking to each other or playing with him, they would all stare at the same big glowing window mounted on their wall. Sometimes they would all react to whatever they were seeing, laughing or gasping together. But they rarely looked at him unless he did something particularly attention-getting. He had tried all his best tricks to compete with the glowing window, Buster explained. He had brought them his favorite tennis ball, performed his most impressive rolling-over routine, and even attempted to balance treats on his nose for extended periods. But no matter how perfectly he executed these behaviors, his humans would only glance at him briefly before returning their attention to the bright screen. What bothered Buster most was that he couldn't understand what was happening inside the glowing window that was more interesting than his company. He had tried watching it himself, but the moving pictures didn't make sense to him. There were humans doing various things, and sometimes other animals, but none of them seemed to be present in any meaningful way. They were like shadows or dreams, there but not really there. Buster had even tried positioning himself between his family and their glowing window, hoping to remind them that he was real and present and eager for their attention. But they would simply peer around him or gently move him aside, treating him like an obstacle rather than a beloved family member seeking connection. As I listened to Buster's story, I felt both sad and relieved. Sad, because it was clear that this problem extended beyond just my household, but relieved to know that I wasn't the only one struggling with these changes. Buster's experience was remarkably similar to my own, despite the differences between cats and dogs in almost every other aspect of life. Next, I sought out Goldina, the goldfish who lived in a large tank in the house across the street. Communicating with Goldina required standing very close to her window and speaking slowly, since the glass seemed to muffle our conversation. But she was eager to share her perspective on the recent changes in her household. Goldina explained that her situation was perhaps even more frustrating than mine or Buster's, because she had never had much of her humans' attention to begin with. She had always been more of a decorative presence in their home, appreciated for her graceful swimming and the peaceful ambience she provided. But even that limited attention had diminished significantly since her humans discovered their glowing windows. In the past, her humans would sometimes pause during their daily activities to watch her swim, finding her movements soothing and meditative. They would occasionally talk to her through the glass, asking how she was doing or commenting on her beauty. These moments had been precious to Goldina, brief connections that made her feel seen and valued, despite her aquatic isolation. But now, her humans barely glanced at her tank, except when it was time to add food. They would walk past her without pausing, their eyes fixed on their glowing windows, even while moving through their house. The gentle attention that had once been part of her daily experience had vanished almost entirely. Goldina had tried swimming in more dramatic patterns, creating elaborate loops and spirals that should have been visually captivating. She had even attempted to time her most graceful movements for moments when her humans were nearby, hoping to catch their eye with particularly beautiful displays of aquatic artistry. But her efforts went largely unnoticed, her performances playing to an audience that was looking elsewhere. What struck me about Goldina's story was how it highlighted the universal nature of our problem. Even creatures who had never been the center of attention were feeling the impact of their humans' fascination with glowing windows. The small moments of connection that had previously existed between humans and their animal companions were disappearing, replaced by an absorption in digital experiences that seemed to exclude the physical world entirely. My conversation with Charlie, the parakeet from down the street, provided yet another perspective on our shared situation. Charlie had always been more talkative than the rest of us, both literally and figuratively. He had learned to mimic several human words and phrases, and his humans had previously found great entertainment in his vocal abilities. Charlie explained that he had tried using his speaking skills to compete with the glowing windows, repeating his humans' favorite phrases and even attempting to learn new words that he heard coming from their devices. But even his most impressive vocal performances seemed to fade into background noise when his humans were absorbed in their screens. He had noticed that his humans would sometimes laugh at things they saw on their glowing windows, the same kind of delighted laughter that his own antics had once provoked. This realization had been particularly painful for Charlie, who had always taken pride in his ability to bring joy and amusement to his household. Now it seemed that whatever lived inside the glowing windows could provide that same entertainment more reliably and with less effort than he could offer. Charlie had even tried learning phrases that he heard coming from the glowing windows, thinking that maybe he could become part of whatever was capturing his humans' attention. But this strategy had backfired, as his humans seemed annoyed rather than amused when he repeated things from their devices. It was as if they wanted to keep their glowing window experiences separate from their interactions with him. As I spoke with each of these animals, a pattern began to emerge. We were all experiencing variations of the same fundamental problem. Our humans had discovered a source of entertainment and connection that seemed to satisfy needs that we had previously helped fulfill. The glowing windows offered novelty, variety, and stimulation in ways that individual pets simply couldn't match. But our conversations also revealed something hopeful. Despite our various frustrations and feelings of neglect, all of us still felt loved by our humans. The core affection was still there, even when the attention was elsewhere. Our humans still cared for our basic needs, still showed us kindness when they were not absorbed in their devices, and still seemed to find comfort in our presence, even when they weren't actively engaging with us. We began to think of ourselves as an informal support group, a community of pets learning to adapt to a world where we had to share our humans' attention with mysterious forces that lived inside glowing rectangles. We agreed to check in with each other regularly, sharing strategies for coping with loneliness and celebrating small victories when we managed to capture our humans' focus, even briefly. Buster suggested that maybe we were experiencing a natural evolution in the relationship between humans and animals. Just as humans had once spent more time outdoors and now preferred to be inside, maybe their attention was simply shifting to new forms of engagement that we didn't yet understand. This didn't make our feelings less valid, but it might help us approach the situation with more acceptance and less personal hurt. Goldina pointed out that we still provided something the glowing windows couldn't: physical presence, warmth, and unconditional companionship. Even when our humans weren't actively paying attention to us, we were still there, still part of their daily lives in ways that the people inside the screens could never be. Charlie reminded us that we each had unique gifts that couldn't be replicated by any technology. His ability to speak, Buster's loyal enthusiasm, Goldina's peaceful grace, and my own cat-specific talents for comfort and independence were all irreplaceable qualities that our humans had chosen to invite into their lives. As our informal pet support group meeting came to an end, I felt less alone than I had in weeks. The problem of competing with glowing windows was bigger than just my household, but it was also more manageable when shared with others who understood the experience. We were all adapting to changes that we hadn't chosen and didn't fully understand, but we were doing it together, and that made the process feel less overwhelming. Walking back to my house that evening, I felt a renewed sense of perspective about my situation. I was still a beloved pet, even if the nature of that relationship was changing. My humans still needed me, even if they didn't always show it in ways I immediately recognized. And I was part of a larger community of animals who were all learning to navigate this new world where attention had become a more complex and precious resource. The glowing windows might have changed the rules of engagement between humans and their pets, but they hadn't eliminated the fundamental bonds that connected us. Those relationships were still there, perhaps hidden beneath layers of digital distraction, but still real and still meaningful. My job was to figure out how to maintain and nurture those connections in this new environment, and I was beginning to think that might be possible after all. As the weeks passed, and my humans' fascination with their glowing windows only seemed to deepen, I developed a new routine for the quiet hours after they had finally put their devices away and settled into sleep. These nighttime wanderings became my favorite part of each day, a time when I could explore our house without competition from the bright screens that usually commanded so much attention. The house felt completely different at night. During the day, when my humans were awake and engaged with their glowing windows, our home buzzed with a kind of electric energy that came from all the devices that were constantly running, connecting, and communicating with the mysterious networks that lived beyond our walls. But at night, when most of these devices went to sleep, or at least dimmed their brightness, the house returned to something closer to its natural state. I would begin my nightly exploration in the living room, where my humans' larger glowing windows sat silent and dark on their tables and shelves. Without their bright screens and constant activity, these devices looked harmless and ordinary, like sleeping creatures that had temporarily given up their power to captivate and distract. I would approach them carefully, sniffing their smooth surfaces and trying to understand how something so simple-looking could hold such control over the humans I loved. The surfaces of these dormant devices were cool to the touch and reflected the ambient light from street lamps and the moon outside. Sometimes I would see my own reflection looking back at me from their dark screens, a ghostly cat image superimposed over the black surface. It was oddly comforting to see myself reflected in these objects that had seemed so impenetrable during the day. At least in their sleeping state, they acknowledged my existence. Moving through the house, during these quiet hours, I would notice all the other glowing objects that had multiplied throughout our home in recent months. There were small lights on various devices that blinked or glowed steadily throughout the night, creating a constellation of tiny stars that marked the presence of our electronic companions. The router in the hallway closet hummed softly, with its own private conversations. The smart thermostat on the wall displayed the time in gentle blue numbers. Even the coffee maker had acquired a small light that indicated it was ready to spring into action at the programmed morning hour. All of these devices seemed to exist in a kind of parallel world that operated alongside our physical home, but according to different rules and rhythms. They were always connected to something beyond our house, always ready to receive or transmit information that I couldn't see or understand. During the day, when my humans were actively engaging with their glowing windows, this parallel world felt threatening and competitive. But at night, when everything was quiet, it seemed more like a sleeping city that coexisted peacefully with our analog world of furniture and plants and comfortable spaces. I would often pause in the hallway to listen to the subtle sounds that these devices made. There was the almost inaudible whir of hard drives spinning, the soft whoosh of cooling fans, and the occasional beep or chime that indicated some kind of electronic conversation taking place. These sounds created a kind of technological lullaby that had become part of the background of our home, so constant that it was usually unnoticeable, but so present that its absence would probably feel strange. The kitchen was particularly interesting during my nighttime wanderings because it contained the most diverse collection of glowing indicators. The refrigerator displayed the time and temperature, its screen reflecting softly off the polished surfaces around it. The microwave contributed its own digital clock, adding to the temporal redundancy that seemed to be a feature of modern homes. Even the dishwasher had acquired a small light that indicated its current operational status. All of these devices seemed to be waiting patiently for their human companions to wake up and need their services again. They maintained their readiness through the night hours, like loyal servants standing by to fulfill whatever requests might come with the dawn. There was something both touching and slightly unsettling about this constant state of technological preparedness. During my explorations, I would sometimes encounter other night-active creatures that shared our home. There were the mice who lived in the walls and came out during the quiet hours to search for crumbs and investigate interesting smells. I would watch them navigate around the glowing indicators and humming devices with the same careful attention that I paid to these mysterious objects. They seemed to accept the technological landscape as simply another feature of their environment, neither fearful nor particularly interested in the electronic activity surrounding them. The moths and other insects that found their way into our house were more obviously affected by the glowing devices. They would circle the various lights with the same hypnotic fascination that my humans showed for their screens during the day. I would watch these tiny creatures dancing around the electronic indicators and wonder if they were experiencing something similar to what drew my humans to their glowing windows. Perhaps there was something universally compelling about artificial light and the promise of connection it seemed to represent. Sometimes I would discover that one of the devices had been left on, its screen glowing softly in the darkness and displaying whatever had last captured my human's attention. I would position myself in front of these accidental windows into the digital world and try to make sense of what I was seeing. Usually there would be frozen images of people or text or colorful graphics that meant nothing to me. Occasionally there would be moving images that continued to play even without an audience, creating a private performance for an audience of one confused cat. My nighttime wanderings also took me to the windows where I could observe the larger world beyond our house. I noticed that many of the neighboring homes also glowed with similar collections of electronic indicators and device screens. The soft blue and green and white lights created a kind of technological aurora that had become part of the nighttime landscape. It seemed that every household in our area was participating in the same electronic ecosystem that had transformed our own home. From my perch on the windowsill, I could sometimes see into other houses where glowing screens were still active even during the late hours. There would be the flickering light of televisions in living rooms, the steady glow of computer monitors in home offices, and the smaller lights of personal devices being used by humans who hadn't yet surrendered to sleep. The entire neighborhood seemed to be connected to this vast network of glowing windows and electronic conversations. But I also noticed that the natural world continued to exist alongside all of this technological activity. The moon still moved across the sky according to its ancient schedule. The stars still shone with their distant light, though they had to compete with the artificial glow from all the electronic devices. Trees swayed in the night breeze, and nocturnal animals went about their business largely unbothered by the electronic activity humming around them. This observation gave me some comfort. During my lonely night sleeping spot, I would often feel more at peace than I did during the busy daytime hours. The night belonged to the physical world in ways that the day no longer seemed to. During these quiet hours, I could reclaim my sense of importance and belonging in our home. I was the guardian of the sleeping house, the observer of the technological landscape, the bridge between the digital and analog worlds that coexisted within our walls. These nighttime wanderings became a form of meditation for me, a way of processing the changes that had occurred in my daily life and finding my place in this new reality. They reminded me that I still had a role to play in our household, even if that role had evolved in ways I was still learning to understand. I had noticed that my humans sometimes seemed tired or stressed after spending long periods engaged with their devices. They would rub their eyes or stretch their necks or make small sounds of frustration that suggested their digital activities weren't always pleasant or relaxing. Sometimes they would put their devices away abruptly, as if they had suddenly realized how much time had passed, or remembered something important they had been neglecting. Perhaps the glowing windows weren't just entertainment for my humans, but also a source of obligation and pressure. Maybe they felt compelled to stay connected to the networks and communities that existed within their devices, even when they might have preferred to spend time in our quiet, analog household. If this were true, then they might be experiencing their own version of the adjustment that I was going through, trying to balance competing demands on their time and attention. Instead of trying to interrupt my humans when they were engaged with their devices, perhaps I could simply be present and available for the moments when they were ready to engage with the physical world. Instead of feeling jealous of the time they spent looking at glowing windows, maybe I could appreciate the time they did spend with me as being more precious, because it was chosen rather than assumed. The glowing windows would continue to be part of our lives, and I would continue to adapt to their presence. But I had learned that adaptation didn't require surrender or defeat. I could maintain my own identity and value while coexisting peacefully with the technological forces that had transformed our household. I was still their cat, still their companion, still their connection to the warm, breathing, purring world that existed beyond any screen. The end. If you are still awake, try our other movie story videos. Subscribe if you liked the video. Thanks.